Thank you. This is really a sort of compliment to Nigel Shapolt's talk. Indeed, I shared some of my slides with him, and I see some of my pictures have already been reused, and we believe in data reuse. So I'm sorry about that.
The other one, the other clicker.
Ah, right. This one. Okay. Just to sort of recap on data.gov.uk. Now, sort of about 2 years since we started work, about 18 months since it was publicly launched, and it's been regularly refreshed in that time, and I'll explain a bit of that later. We've established public data principles. Current score, 7,148 data sets, steady increase over the time, including 32 gigabytes of geographical data, which in the UK counting rules counts as about 10 data sets rather than individual shapefiles counting as data sets themselves. The Open Government License, common transparency for salaries, spending, contracts and tenders across the whole of central government, all the central government agencies and across local government, and a flow of applications. Throughout this, there have been many obstacles along the way, but we've overcome those by doing rather than debating, and it's been very much of a practical exercise. Question is, do you do this top-down or do you do it bottom-up? Well, we've had very good top-down, personal initiative, not just by the current Prime Minister, but by the previous one, with some very continued backing from the Prime Minister's office to push this through government, and really the Prime Minister wanting to change the way that relationship between government and citizen. Governments can no longer be trusted to be secret. Therefore, governments have to be transparent and open. Bottom up, we've had a very strong set of activists in civil society in the UK pushing this. My Society, chaired by Tom Steinberg, have done a lot on that. The Open Knowledge Foundation themselves, a campaign called Free Our Bills, which is a My Society initiative, which said perhaps the legislation itself should be open. And the Guardian newspaper launched a Free Our Data campaign, and they said they've only had one other campaign, which was to abolish the monarchy. But really strong civil society backing. So is it do it top down or bottom up? Well, you need both of these, and you need middle out. And this is a very rare photo of the first Raw Data Now T-shirts being used by me and my colleagues and some other people from the Cabinet Office in a Rounders team about 2 years ago now. Key points that I want to talk about in the next few minutes on public agency implementation. I want to talk a bit about developing policy, how you do that. I want to talk a bit about getting the data, getting hold of the data in the first place, and then how you deliver that in a successful fashion. It's important to set coherent policy principles, to be consistent, to be principled about what you do. And we've done those through what are now known as the public data principles. But it's very important, we found, not to set these in stone. If you try and embed these in legislation too early, if you try to even embed them in fully collectively agreed guidance too early, everyone who doesn't really understand this, who's worried about their data, will get their exception baked in. And the sort of bureaucratic weasel words, where appropriate, to the extent that it can be, to the extent appropriate, subject to operational circumstances of the department, creep in. There's a famous Yes Minister, the British TV series, where all the heads of department sit around and agree with an initiative in principle and all find reasons why they can't do it in their own department. So it's very important to be principled, but not try and force through principles into full collective agreement that people don't yet understand and don't understand what they mean for them. And the public data principles, I've put these in the slide pack. I won't go through them now, but it's just so, and they're on the website, but it's just so they travel with this presentation. One of the things we found very useful to do, and I hit on this from when I read mathematics at university before I switched to law. My math tutor said to me, the thing about a math problem, that if you can't solve the math problem in front of you, think about a problem you can solve. And so what we tried to do was, where is the guidance, knowledge, learning around government that we could reuse, and be seen to reuse, and that would be more comfortable for everyone because that had been through all the processes, and it would help bind in some of the other actors within the government system. So that actually some quite good guidance from the national statistician, things like what to do with administrative data that leads into official statistics, what to do about releasing market sensitive data where the number of official statistics which are market sensitive, economic statistics, and they have protocols about that. They've actually done a lot of work over the years about releasing data. What do you do when fine-grained data might actually lead to the identification of individuals? And they have protocols for that. And the protocols don't actually go, so if there's any possibility at all, you must not do it. What they do is, what is a reasonable judgment to be made, and what safeguards do you need to put in place? There's quite a history on government scientific and research data, and the principle of government research should be published, whether the ministers like the conclusions of it or not. So we try and build on that. Some learning from the Freedom of Information Act, both what worked and what didn't in the Freedom of Information Act. And as Nigel said, we're actually sponsoring some amendments to the Freedom of Information Act to deal with more clearly with reuse of FOI information. There's of course W3C standards and working groups, and now, which there weren't, I suppose, 2 years ago, there are now over 100 other open data sites from which you can steal good ideas or learn from their experience. So I don't think anyone's got all the answers to this, but there's lots now, a growing body of experience for people to use. It's also important not to just think about new data. So we defined open data, opening up data, as also data that had previously been published in some way, but was in a non-reusable format, was with a restricted license, had only been published to specialist groups, to the community of the people who've done it, was only available for payment, was only issued in response to FOI requests, the data that was there but difficult to find, so people didn't use it, and difficult to understand when you got to it. And so we tried to pick a portfolio of targets in each phase, not all just completely new data, but also data which there need to be some persuasion, some arm twisting to get it into a reusable open form. You've got to master the data hugging excuses, and Tim Berners-Lee in the TED Talk, which launched this in March 2009, said, people hug their database, they don't want to let it go. You've no idea of the number of excuses people come up with to hang on to their data. Well, that's just a sample of the excuses that we heard and continue to hear. I particularly like the one, we know the data's wrong, and we will waste valuable resources inputting the corrections people send to us. But the general point on these, all these sometimes have some truth in them. So you can't just say, this is rubbish. Sometimes some of them have some truth in them. Often they rationalize the bureaucratic fear of the unknown. We've never released this data before. There must be a good reason why we've not released it before. Therefore, let's try and think of a plausible reason. Data owners actually have to be helped through this process. You need to listen to their reasons, talk to them gently about it, just test the argument. As time goes on, example and precedent become your friends, because you can point to other people doing it. And for the first phase, you may have to compromise on what data is actually released, but don't compromise on the license under which it's released. Because if you've got only some of the data, you've got them to agree to an open license, but only some of the data. So some fields you take out, you agree to take out. You can always go back and ask for more, particularly if they can then see this data being used and they're getting some value for it, then they'll be amenable to give more. Once you bake some of these reasons not to do it or to restrict it into a license, that's then very, very difficult to change. So compromise on the data where you have to temporarily, but not on the license. Incremental delivery rather than big bang. This is the graph of data sets on data.gov.uk. The big leap in January 2010 was when we turned on the public side. But as you'll see, steady growth since then. And incremental is far easier for the team. Difficult cases can be put aside until later. Don't concede that this data will never be published, but say, I understand there's some difficulties here, we're quite busy at the moment, let's come back and talk about that later. It gives the team a clear focus in each phase. One of the dangers of being a small team trying to get things done is you spend all your time arguing with people who don't want to do it. And you actually need to focus your time on working with those who do want to do it or who can be persuaded. Incremental allows the data pipeline to be turned into automated processes and repeatable processes and automated tools. Allows you to respond to feedback of people actually using that data. It creates a steady news flow. Actually, releasing 1,000 data sets on a day, very few of those are going to be picked up by the press. Actually, what tends to happen in the developer community as well, that only a few of those will get seized on by developers. So actually a steady flow of data gets a steady news flow and a steady application flow. And the more you get out there, the more peer pressure there is on refuseniks around government, those who will not do it. And working at senior levels in government, it's incredibly competitive. And they all watch one another like hawks. And so once you get a few leaders doing something, releasing some data, getting credit for that, getting praised for it, suddenly other people want to do it in a way that they didn't want to do 6 months previously. And if you're being incremental, you don't have to get it right to start with. You can afford to be rough if then you've got some space to improve. You've got to continuously engage with the developers, which we actually did before the public launch, and this is the most frightening tweet of my life, where I just sort of stared at this for about 30 minutes before pressing the send button, because this actually invited developers to come and help us in the development of data.gov.uk. And we had people who clicked on that link went on a journey through our blog and enrolling in a Google group. And we had about 25% conversion of it. So it was, Twitter in that sense was quite well targeted. We had hack days, and this was a good way of getting departments to really understand what it was about. This bottom left is Tim Berners-Lee and Nigel Shadbolt at the Home Office hack day, where they'd released some data especially for the occasion, and a couple of very senior people came in at the back and didn't sort of ask any questions or say anything, but they actually saw exciting things were going on and there was a lot of energy, and some of the applications that had been done were really close to things they wanted to do in terms of policy objectives and message to get across. So get the departments involved. We've done a lot of work with groups like Rewired State on the right-hand side and Young Rewired State. Important to highlight applications, not just data. That it's really applications that grab the political consciousness, grab the mainstream consciousness. In one famous case where we released 24 million rows of government spending data, the mainstream journalists tried to download that onto Microsoft Excel, crashed their computers. But then the Where Does My Money Go people in The Guardian, within 24 hours, have built navigators to that, and within 48 hours there were main newspaper stories about what had been found in that data. Create heroes of the agencies who give the data. So this is again a Home Office example, where the crime data was put out, and this was a top downloaded free application on the UK Apple App Store for about 4 weeks running, and the Home Office were really pleased about this, that their data was being used. So create the heroes of them, and create some heroes from totemic data releases. Believe me, the wake-up call to senior civil servants was this Daily Mail headline, particularly for those who weren't on the list. But it did bring them home to them. And some heroes among the developers. I wasn't going to show a picture of Chris Taggart, clearly. You'll see him in the flesh later. But this is Isabel Long, 16-year-old developer who hit on a great idea for using the real-time government energy consumption data to actually find out which departments turn off their lights at night and their computers at night. The blue line is the Ministry of Defence. The purple line is the Treasury. And defence is sort of a 24-hour-a-day business, but I'm not so sure about the Treasury. Manage expectations and prepare for mistakes. And David Cameron, at the start of this government's initiative, actually gave a podcast where he said, these are very tiny steps, we won't do everything at once, and it won't always be perfect, so bear with us. And learn from mistakes. So actually putting the data out there, putting the metadata out there, this had been on a publicly available repository for over a year that no one had ever known, and bizarrely categorized as part of the National Rail Travel Survey, were the UK bacon and ham production statistics. And finally, it's not an IT project, and you've got to stop it becoming one. You've got to ensure that the IT people are on side, but generally the CIOs, the IT directors, don't own the data. It's sort of business and policy people who own the data, and the CIOs haven't the authority to release it. Corporate IT has lots else to do. I mean, they've got to keep HP and Accenture and IBM in business, and they've got lots to do, so let them get on with it. Don't let the policymakers brand this as just an IT project. You've got to get the policymakers to think what it means for their policy, what it means for the message they're trying to get across. I don't quite understand how this could be packaged up into a conventional government IT project when you don't know what it's going to look like at the end. How would you write a specification for that? I mean, it is this sort of perpetual beta of you've got to learn, you've got to be able to respond, you've got to think how people are using this data and how to help them better. And there's lots of good open source there, and that was the best decision we ever made, which was just to draw on open source. It meant it was very easy to find the skills to use it, and full marks to Open Knowledge Foundation and CKAN in pushing it along. And finally, the website is a means, not an end. This is not about beautiful websites. This is about making the data findable and usable. So how can developers and activists help in this? Argue from evidence. The government officials, most ministers, are not readily convinced by this data should be open because it's the public's in some way. there's increasing body of evidence of the economic value of this, of the social value of this, of the value to government itself of having that data out there and reused. Request specific data and prioritize and explain why that specific data. Initial efforts on a public open data site, they won't be very good. So, but don't throw too many rocks. Praise it in the sort of half full way. Good start, good start. Lots of opportunity for improvement. Those sorts of things. Celebrate success. Do something with the first data. And actually, very simple mashups are simple to do. A lot of people in this room wouldn't think they're very sophisticated or indeed very useful. But to policy officials and to ministers who've struggled to get anything at all graphic out of their IT department for years, they're fantastic. So just do something simple with the data to show it's being used. Draw in the mainstream media, and that's the way that you really get the message back to ministers and to senior officials. They don't follow Twitter, they don't subscribe to the Open Knowledge Foundation blog. You've got to get how this data is being used into the mainstream media, and engage with the agency team. But do remember that the agency team, have a lot to do within government, and they often can't talk about that. And the most important thing is, please use the data to deliver visible benefits to society, and that's what really will convince policymakers to do more of this and keep it going. Thank you.
We're now open for Q&A. Any questions? Okay.
Yes, can you tell us something about the process of publishing the data? What's the workflow to get the data from the desk to your site?
Right. One of the things we decided fairly early on was that data.gov.uk would not actually have any data on it. That very much simplified the chain of provenance, that the data would sit on a departmental resource, either a website or an API, and they would supply metadata. To start with, they filled in a Excel form that we thought we might automate putting that into CKAN. In fact, generally it was retyped. And to start with, that was sustainable. As time has gone on, we've moved to more automated submission, either a batch submission or individual departments being able to put their own metadata directly onto CKAN. We've also, as time's gone on, put more validity checking on the metadata as it goes in. So particularly with some inherited repositories, we found there were actually broken links which were being imported. Now we've got mechanisms to stop that happening. People in departments are very prone, to post in links to the data on their own intranet, which of course are broken for everyone else. So you had to work that through. As time's gone on, we've tried to push more responsibility down on departments, train people there to do it, to keep the central team small and agile and concentrating on new things.
Okay, any further questions? In the back.
More of a brief comment than a question. I'm just struck by how similar the arguments you're having to go through with people in the government departments are to the similar arguments we have with academics about making their papers open access. There's a lot of very similar discussions going on there.
I can believe it. I can believe it, and I think we're not entirely there on government scientists' own information yet, as you know. Okay.
Last question. Anyone?
Just a very short request. Can I see the excuses once again?
Yes. Thank you. They're just a sample. I did a workshop with Craig Tomler, who's one of the Gov 2.0 activists in Australia. And we sort of collected up these, and we've got a list of over 40 that he's put on a wiki for people to work on what the response to each of these are. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.